Okay, on the screen, and then I'll post this um, in the module. Sometimes when I post these Wikipedia maps in the module, it sends you to the Wikipedia page, and you have to find the map on that page, which isn't that hard to do. Just scroll down on the right, and you'll see the map. And what I'm looking for, this is the map of the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. It's very useful. Now, the Mexican-American War is pretty complicated in some ways. I'm going to try to make it simple for this course. There was fighting in New Mexico during this period in Santa Fe. There was fighting in California during this period. But the documentary doesn't really talk about that too much. And in areas where it talks about New Mexico and California, you can skip those parts of the documentary. You won't be tested on those. What I'm interested in is the parts that have to do with Texas and Mexico. So what you'll see is that the U.S. Army, it doesn't show it here very well, unfortunately, but the U.S. Army initially lands in Corpus Christi. And the reason it lands in 1846, and the reason it lands in Corpus Christi is, remember, the disputed territory is the territory between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. And of course, Corpus Christi is on the Nueces River. So what happens is the U.S. Army lands in Corpus Christi, and then it marches towards the Rio Grande. As the documentary makes very clear, Polk wants to provoke a war with Mexico. But it's very important for him that it looks like Mexico starts the war first. And the reason for that is he wants to go to Congress and say, hey, Mexico started this war, and so we need to declare a war on Mexico. So basically what happens is that Polk sends the U.S. Army to Corpus Christi. They march towards the Rio Grande, and then he gets what he wants. Mexican troops attack American troops just on the other side of the Rio Grande, which makes Polk very happy, because then he can go to Congress and say, hey, U.S. troops were attacked on U.S. soil, which was not really the case, because under international law during this period, the area between the Rio Grande and the Nueces was Mexico. So anyway, so the U.S. Army starts in Corpus Christi, marches towards the Rio Grande. There's a couple of battles just north of the Rio Grande in what's Texas today. Palo Alto is the most important one of these battles. That's where the fighting starts. So the actual fighting in the Mexican-American War starts in the Battle of Palo Alto. And there's another battle in Texas, which shows up on the map, Riscasa de la Palma in 1846. And then the action shifts to Monterey. Long story short, Santa Anna shows up in Monterey. Can you believe it? Santa Anna shows up again. And after a bloody battle near Monterey, the Mexican army is defeated at the Battle of Buena Vista in 1847. Okay, so that's the first part of the Mexican-American War, and the movie will make that clear. Now, what happens after that is the action shifts to southern Mexico or central Mexico. So, number one, the U.S. Army lands in Corpus Christi, marches towards the Rio Grande, and fights two battles near the Rio Grande. It then moves in across the Rio Grande, fights a battle in Monterey, and fights the Battle of Buena Vista in northern Mexico, which is near Monterey. Santa Anna is the commander, and just by the skin of their teeth, the U.S. Army defeats the Mexican army in northern Mexico. Now, at that point, the American general, Zachary Taylor, gets tied up in politics because he becomes really popular, and Polk thinks that he's going to come back to the United States and run for president. So he gets sidelined. Now, some of you that are listening to this and thinking, oh my God, I don't understand this is all this at all. This is being too rushed. This will make a lot more sense when you watch the documentary. Okay, so don't get too fussed about it. Just kind of get a sense of the overall. The first part of the Mexican-American War takes place in Texas, then moves to Monterrey, then the Battle of Buena Vista, then the commanding US general gets sidelined. Then the battle shifts towards central and southern Mexico. A general by the name of Winfield Scott lands in Veracruz, and he marches to Mexico City. And after some very tough fighting, he captures Mexico City. And at that point, the Mexicans surrender, and then the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed. So the Mexican-American War, or the part that I want you to focus on, happens in a couple of phases. And it actually happens with two commanding generals. The first one, Zachary Taylor, who is victorious in Mexico and in northern Mexico, is sidelined. And the second general who captures Mexico City is a man by the name of Winfield Scott. And now, again, this movie, this documentary will make this clear as you watch it. So don't get too frustrated if this podcast doesn't make a lot of sense. What I want to do is just introduce this map to you, give you an overall orientation of the action during the Mexican-American War, and then watch the documentary. And if you're confused, you might want to listen to this podcast again. And then after watching the documentary, this podcast should make a lot more sense. As I said in a previous podcast, you do not have to know all the ins and outs of the battles, both in Texas, in Monterrey, Buena Vista, and the capture of Mexico City. I'm not going to torture you with the actual maneuvers of the battles. I just want you to know the significant actions, the generals involved, and the basic story without getting too much involved with the details of the battles, because that'll drive you crazy. Also, I want you to know the role of Santa Anna in this. Once again, Santa Anna basically, I wouldn't say he is a traitor to the Mexican cause, but he's a loser. And once again, he'd been defeated by Texans in 1836. And amazingly, he is still the commanding general of the Mexican army, and he will be defeated, especially in northern Mexico in 1846 and 1847. Last thing I'll say, I'm going to post this map on the module page.